Hello, YouTube. Europe has been suffering from the dominance of the wild boars for many years. The climate has become warmer, there's plenty of food, so they breed rapidly and roam the streets in whole herds. At the same time, many of them are radioactive. The level of infection in some cases exceeds the norm by an order of magnitude. Previously, the Chernobyl disaster was blamed for this, but years have passed. Other traces of infection have almost disappeared, but only wild boars still drive Geiger counters crazy. Austrian and German scientists tried to find a solution to this phenomenon and made an unexpected discovery. Thousands of radioactive wild boars are roaming around Europe with an infection level much higher than normal. Radioactive wild boars began to be noticed in Europe about 20 years ago. In Germany, the authorities specifically purchased and destroyed meat contaminated with radiation. It was not suitable for food, since the specific activity of radionuclides exceeded German standards 800 becquerels per kilogram. But the radiation is not visible or audible, so people continued to eat it. So it was impossible to solve this problem only with the help of money. That's how it was possible to solve it. The state paid hunters 100 euros for a young radioactive wild boar and 200 euros for a mature one. Handing over infected meat for destruction became more profitable than selling it by conventional means, so it soon disappeared from the market. The scheme worked fine while radioactive wild boars were rare, but it did not last long. The rate of spread of the infection is visible in the amounts that the German authorities spent on payments to hunters. In the early 2000s, they spent no more than 25,000 euros per year, and by 2009, at least 425,000 euros were required to buy that infected meat. The same thing happened in other countries. By 2017, every second wild boar living in the southwest of the Czech Republic represented a local radiation disaster. In Sweden, the situation was even worse. Of the 30 wild boars tested in the same year in the area of the Swedish city of Gävle, only 6 had an infection that did not exceed the normal level. It was better to stay away from them. In one of the Swedish wild boars, the specific activity of radionuclides was as much as 16,000 becquerel per kilogram. That is an order of magnitude higher than the Swedish norm. And this, according to experts, was not the limit. Ulf Friedman from Swedish environmental firm Kaluna, who organized the inspection of the Tula wild boars, claimed that in the north of the country, the animals were even more radioactive. When they get to the worst areas, we'll probably see 40,000 becquerels per kilogram. That's what he told Daily Telegraph newspaper. You would think it was 1986 again. For some unknown reason, the wild boars remained as radioactive as they were immediately after Chernobyl. In 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster occurred. The radioactive cloud covered the European part of the Soviet Union and moved on to Central Europe and Scandinavia. In some European countries, for several years it was not recommended to eat mushrooms or wild animal meat. They absorbed radioactive isotopes in the first place. The main source of infection in Europe was considered to be cesium-137, which was thrown out by the burning nuclear power plant. The isotope has a relatively short half-life, only 30 years, so the problem should have solved itself. It was expected that by 2016, half of Chernobyl's cesium-137 would disintegrate. At the same time, the radiation contamination of meat and other food products should have been reduced to acceptable values even faster. Well, that's exactly what happened. At the end of the 1980s and in the 1990s, deer were sometimes found in Europe rotting like Chernobyl wild boars, but every year they became fewer and fewer. Now there is almost no excess cesium in the meat of wild animals. The only exception was the wild boars. For some reason, they remained as radioactive as in the first years after Chernobyl, although not even 30, but as many as 38 years have passed. Experts blame the habits of wild boars for this. They're digging in the ground in search of food, and there's just all the cesium, suggested Ulf Friedman from Kelowna. I mentioned him before. And if you look at deer and moose, they eat in the bushes where there's not much cesium. Another possible reason, according to biologists, were underground mushrooms that wild boars eat. Cesium seeps very slowly through the soil, and those mushrooms grow at a depth of 20 to 40 centimeters. These mushrooms have only recently begun to absorb cesium-137, which was thrown out, so to say, in 1986. As a result, the infection rate of the mushrooms is much higher than expected, and wild boars eat them. For the first time, Austrian and German scientists have checked which isotopes are infected with radioactive wild boars. So experts from the Technical University of Vienna and the University of Hanover decided to approach the mystery of radioactive wild boars from a different angle. They suggested that the meat was infected not with Chernobyl cesium-137, but with an isotope of a different origin, which may have a longer half-life. It is not easy to test this hypothesis. Cesium-137 can be found using conventional radiation detectors precisely because it has a short half-life and its atoms are constantly disintegrating. When the half-life is longer, atoms decay too rarely for this method to work. They need to work with mass spectrometry and make relatively great efforts to accurately distinguish these isotopes from others, explained Georg Steinhauser, one of the authors of the study, professor at the Vienna Technical University. During the study, scientists determined the content of various isotopes of cesium in the meat of 48 wild boars that were shot in Bavaria between 2019 and 2021. They also studied soil samples from the Chernobyl exclusion zone and the vicinity of the nuclear power plant in Fukushima, Japan, where another radiation disaster occurred. Finally, they analyzed a sample of human lung tissue taken in the 1960s, that is long before Chernobyl. 88% of the boar meat samples turned out to be so radioactive that they cannot be eaten. However, the reason for this in many cases was not Chernobyl cesium-137 at all. Unexpectedly, a lot of cesium-135, another radioactive isotope with a half-life of 2.3 million years, was found in Bavarian wild boars. Its content in various samples ranged from 10 to 68%. The radioactivity of wild boars is associated with cesium-135 released during the explosions of nuclear bombs. The release of cesium-135 occurred during atmospheric tests of nuclear weapons, which occurred in the 1950s and 1960s. In 1963, most nuclear weapon countries, those who possess nuclear weapons, signed a treaty prohibiting the detonation of nuclear charges in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. Since then, tests have usually been conducted underground. The last atmospheric tests took place in 1980. and this was performed by China. The researchers did not expect such a result. Everything indicated that European wild boars continue to emit radiation due to the events that happened at the dawn of the Cold War. It seems to them that it is something mind-blowing, according to Georg Steinhauser. It has been 60 years since then. For other experts, the news about the infection of wild boars with that cesium-135 also came as a surprise. A professor at the University of Colorado, radiochemist Ralph Siddall, admitted to the American newspaper Washington Post that he was extremely surprised by the discovery of German and Austrian colleagues. The results of the study clearly show that when determining environmental and health harm, the contribution of older sources of contamination, such as nuclear weapons test, cannot be ignored, according to him. So this was news to him, and it's a very strange development. It's not a healthy one, and I've been presenting videos to you. First of all, about Chernobyl, I have a whole playlist, but also I have a number of videos about strange behavior in animals, especially in last few years. And I urge you to keep an eye on this. Something is happening in our animal world, and I'm not going to point out and say it's climate change. No. Something, I think, more profound. And I think the more science pays attention to it, the better. One day I wanted to make, and maybe I will, a video about the strange dolphin attacks on people around Japan. But, there's a special area in Japan when they attack people. And I think it was just before the radiation water was to be released. It's very interesting, and I want to pursue it. But today, I wanted to tell you about the wild boars of Europe. And I want to thank you for your attention to my work, my research, my many areas of research. And if you can support my endeavors, you can do so through the links you'll find in the description to this video. Please like my videos. Please sign up for my channel. Please tell others.